it is very, very different with the types of comments and the types of threads that you're actually posting on Reddit. People don't want to hear the woo-woo stuff that you're posting on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily about thought leadership. It's about anonymity. I think it's both trust and authenticity are both very, very, very important. But I think there's a general thirst for authenticity and trust building and value adding. A lot of them care about market share and a lot of them care about reputational management. And so that becomes very tricky because you usually don't want to add fuel to the fire is the best way to put it. And I think it's about brand building. It's about correcting misinformation.
Adam, you started Llama Lead Gen while you were traveling the world on Remote Year. I've heard a lot about Remote Year. I have a couple friends who are now entrepreneurs that absolutely love the experience. At what point did you realize that this was like actually a company and not just a full-time kind of freelance job?
Yeah, very late on into Remote Year, if I'm being fully transparent. When I started, quit my job, started doing the whole freelance thing. One client turned into two, turned into three, it just kind of snowballed from there. And I was very fortunate to have that early success early on. And so that's when I started to kind of formulate more of a solidifying company presence. So I think it was, without getting too much into the detail of what Remote Year actually is,
Yeah.
but essentially it's a year-long travel program, right? It's a work travel program where you're going in a community and groups of, there was about 30 plus people in my group. So it was a
Mm.
really awesome experience.
Yeah.
Really life-changing, great experience all around. But yeah, I didn't really truly formulate my company until probably like month 7 or 8 into the program.
Mm.
Actually, I think it might have even been later, like month 8 or 9. But yeah, I was kind of dabbling with freelancing and, like I said, just kind of snowballed from there.
I actually, by the way, for the audience, I just looked up Remote Year and remoteyear.com is available
It
on
is
GoDaddy.
defunct.
So there you
It
go.
is defunct. Yeah. So Remote Year, unfortunately, RIP.
Yeah.
A whole slew of things happened there. But yeah, I was fortunate enough to go on it while it was still, kind of around. They ran into a lot of, there was financial issues. They got purchased by other companies. So
Mm.
yeah, unfortunately, RIP to Remote Year. But I think I
Yeah.
was in group number, it was like 21 or 22
Oh,
actually, which
wow.
was pretty cool. And then, so I was pretty early on in terms of, the groups that actually went on it, but it was awesome. It was just a
Yeah.
great program. So I'm definitely glad I got to do it before they're now defunct.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
can no longer do that.
I wish I would have gotten into that program while it was still around. So
Yep.
take me, I don't know if this was before or after Remote Year. I would assume before. You actually worked at LinkedIn and that kind of
Yep.
that helped with what you currently do. We're going to talk about thought leadership. We're
Yep.
going to talk about different platforms that the agency focuses on right now, but tell me a little bit about what you did at LinkedIn and how that carries
Yeah.
over to Llama Lead Gen.
Yeah. Yeah. So before Remote Year, I actually worked at a variety of different companies. So I've always been in the marketing space. I've been at, one of the big six agencies in Dentsu. So used to work at, big agency land and getting that whole experience. I also worked, of course, on the publisher side at LinkedIn, which I'll get to in a minute. And then I've
Hmm.
also worked on the video ad server side. So I kind of touched all those three buckets and
Mm.
then eventually went into freelancing and now own my own company. So I've kind of hit like every single company structure, I guess, if you could call it that,
Hmm.
within the marketing landscape. So I think it's definitely helped me to bring in certain facets that I've learned from different companies. LinkedIn was incredibly useful, especially when I was just starting out, because there wasn't a whole lot of LinkedIn specific freelancers and contractors at that
Mm.
time. This is like 8 to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, I was, at least to my knowledge, just perusing Upwork, LinkedIn, etc.
Mm.
There wasn't that many ex LinkedIn folks that were doing
Mm.
it. And there weren't even really LinkedIn marketing freelancers or LinkedIn marketing, even like organic freelancers who do a lot of the more like go to market, downstream type of relationship building. So it was a very nice niche for me getting started. And I think that's what initially helped propel my freelancing and my contracting career is just having that insider knowledge, so to say,
Mhm.
of what is the right approach to LinkedIn marketing. So I
Mm.
think that what really helped me kind of dive a little bit more into the deep end of the freelancing ocean, so to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. When you say LinkedIn publishing, can you make a distinction for the audience? Like what is publishing versus
Yeah.
just LinkedIn posting?
Yeah, so I probably should have mentioned that. It's exactly that, LinkedIn posting. So
Okay.
it's de facto LinkedIn organic versus LinkedIn paid. So there's a ton of I would say there's probably even more so LinkedIn organic
Hmm.
agencies. These are the folks that are focused on posting thought leadership content, which I'm happy to go into
Yeah.
a little bit later.
Definitely.
We do a ton of that still for a lot of our clients. And then, of course, like DMing and outreach, kind of like your kind of combining LinkedIn organic social with sales outbound strategy. And then, of course, LinkedIn paid, which is where my background really was.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, let's dive right into it because anyone who is on LinkedIn right now, if you're in the marketing sphere, if you're in any sort of SaaS or I would assume that your newsfeed looks just like mine, which is everyone is way further ahead than I
Yeah.
am. Everyone is just blowing my feet up with Claude and lead magnets, and
Yep.
some of them are
They have
like
all the custom
they have
GPTs already.
exactly. I mean, we're past the age of the custom GPT. This is like,
Yeah.
I created a new Claude skill and I analyzed 100 different whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
tell me about like what is happening on LinkedIn right now? Because it seems pretty saturated, but I'm curious what you're seeing and how your agency differentiates.
Yeah, yeah. So, what I can say is where we really help is with the LinkedIn thought leadership component, and
Mm,
we typically tie that with organic, and we tie it back to paid. So we're
mm,
typically tying that back to boosted posts, essentially,
mm-hmm,
and that's typically how we're helping to generate more retargeting content. As what I see on the LinkedIn feed, I'm definitely not an expert there. So I would take this with a grain of salt, but
mm-hmm,
there is a lot of hoopla. There is a lot of kind of maxing out content and kind of oversimplifications of certain GPU skills that are being built. I have tried a few myself, and some are actually pretty useful,
yeah,
but I think it's very important to look at it with a fine tooth comb and
mm-hmm,
just make sure that what you're signing up for or the advice that you're actually being given is actually going to work for your situation, right?
mm,
Just because I think the market, to your point, is so saturated now
yeah,
with thought leadership content that it's so noisy. It's tough to figure out who you can actually trust. For me, at least, I think it's been helpful to start following some creators that I actually find the value in their content. They're not
mm-hmm,
actually regurgitating information that can be found elsewhere on YouTube's or articles, or but they're kind of giving a little bit of a lens and a sneak peek into their process.
yeah,
I really appreciate that, and I know that a lot of people won't necessarily pull back the curtain and see what Oz looks like,
yeah,
so to say.
yeah,
But I think there's a lot of value in that, right? Even though, you and I might be able to do that with a quick ChatGPT or Claude search nowadays, I still think there's value in knowledge sharing and information sharing because
mm-hmm,
that's where you're going to build trust with your audience. If you're the creator and you're posting about that, that's where that authenticity lies. And we see that on Reddit too, which we also do a lot of Reddit marketing in addition to LinkedIn marketing, although they're very different. It is really
yeah,
interesting to see the comments on Reddit versus LinkedIn. But I think there's a general thirst for authenticity and trust building and value adding.
mm,
And so that's what we always tell our clients is if you're building and creating content in the style of a thought leadership post, no matter if it's a listicle or a personal experience or case study, make sure to include, EEAT for SEO, for semantic
mm-hmm,
SEO for pickup, but also just make sure that, going back to EEAT basics, make sure that what you're saying is actually going to be valuable for your audience, and it's not just
Mhm.
kind of regurgitated info. And that's what's often hard, I think, in working with some of our clients. It's easy to take the easy road and just plug everything into ChatGPT or Claude, but I think it's helpful, and this is sometimes what we do with clients is, hey, let's hop on a quick 5-10 minute call. Let's just do a very informal casual interview with you, and that could
Mhm.
spawn some really good ideas for what that thought leadership post or what that thought leadership ad could look like.
Hey, we hope you're enjoying the coffee and the conversation so far. This show is powered by Digital Web Solutions, and if you've ever wondered how the biggest brands actually build authority, this is it. DWS has a massive network of over 250,000 publishers, real sites that help you rank on Google, and more importantly, stay visible in AI search. It's the heavy lifting most teams just can't do on their own. As a thank you for listening, they're offering an exclusive free strategy call just for our eCoffee listeners. It's a great way to map out your authority plan for 2026. Just click the link below to book yours and see how they can help scale your brand. All right, now let's get back to the show. I love that spontaneous phone call. You and I were talking about a project that I'm working on, and that is essentially it, because I've also identified that where, well, first of all, I want to mention I interviewed Ethan Smith yesterday or 2 days ago, and he is just a perfect example of someone who is posting thought leadership content. I asked him, I was like, dude, do you handwrite all of those? He's like, I have to. There's no other way. He's like posting like actual research. And what I really appreciated is I referenced a post on the podcast. I said, you just posted this. Tell me about that. And he's like, you know what? I posted that 3 days ago. And today I posted a new one that said I was wrong 3 days ago. So it's like actual building in
Prospecting
public.
himself.
So cool. Yeah. So cool.
Yep.
So you mentioned like EEAT in these posts. EEAT, experience, help me out here. Experience,
Experience, expertise,
expertise,
authority. Um,
and trust.
we have so many acronyms. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yes. So that is like a traditional kind of SEO, another acronym,
Yep.
but you're saying to actually put it in social posts like LinkedIn. Do those
Yeah,
get, I mean, is LinkedIn indexed, and like are the SERPs pulling that for content?
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
more and more they are. It's
Mhm.
not to the level where Reddit is, but I'm starting to see inklings, especially on my feed, that
Mm.
LinkedIn is starting to pull.
Mm.
So I would imagine and take this with a grain of salt because I don't know the exact numbers, but
Mhm.
qualitatively, that's the word on the street is that it is pulling more from LinkedIn. Now,
Mm.
LinkedIn, to my knowledge, doesn't have actual deals with ChatGPT or
Mhm.
Claude or Gemini, similar to what Reddit does. So that's why it's probably not pulling
Mm.
that level of like a Reddit. And I know that Wikipedia separately is another biggie as well. That's coming up
Mhm.
more and more in some of our conversations as kind of like optional add-ons, if you will, for like a generative and engine optimization projects that we're doing. But yeah, when I say EEAT for LinkedIn, I think it's looking at it at a different lens. It's not like
Mm.
in your typical traditional SEO sense
Mhm.
because there's only so much word count in a LinkedIn
Yeah.
post, and you don't want to go on and on and on.
Yeah.
But I'm more so saying thinking through the lens of EEAT, how
Mm.
you would frame certain blog posts or certain topics for an SEO blog is trying to not necessarily replicate that, but include that experience, include that authority, and which will then in turn improve your trustworthiness, right,
Mhm.
of the actual content.
Mhm. No, it's sound advice, and a good way to definitely a good way to think about content. Plus, you just have to adapt it a little bit for the news feed to capture attention, grab a hook. You know, it's not like we can
Yep.
format a blog in like H1s, and like we don't have that
Yeah.
in a LinkedIn post. It has to have a hook, and then all of that.
Yep.
So it's a different game for sure, but I think it's a good perspective. Talk to me a little bit more about what you are seeing with Reddit, because man, everyone in AI is talking about like Reddit is the place to be, but it only
Yep.
makes up like 2.5% of what's being cited. So tell me what's going on with Reddit.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, Reddit doesn't make sense for every single brand, for every
Mm,
single client. We do have a bunch of clients that have already onboarded with us for Reddit marketing and geo services.
mm,
And we're seeing really good results so far with
mm,
most, if not all of them. It is interesting because you mentioned it's only being cited like, 2%, 3%, whatever
yeah.
that looks like. I think it's very contextual. I think it really depends on the industry. So, for instance, we
Mm,
have one of our clients is in the red light therapy space, actually. It is incredibly important for them because they have so many competitors. So,
mm,
we use some AI SEO visibility tools, as I'm sure most of your
mm,
audience probably does at this
mm,
stage. There's like a dime a dozen. They all kind of do the same thing, of course, but I think it's more about the UX and what data inputs it's spitting out for you, right? But it's crazy index with Reddit. I mean,
mm,
it's like near 100% of their citations, which is crazy. And
mm.
so that's a client where it really makes sense to invest a lot of time and energy into really building that Reddit presence. But similar to, I think I was saying before in the shift to LinkedIn versus Reddit, it is very, very different with the types of comments and the types of threads that you're actually posting on Reddit. People don't want to hear the woo woo stuff that you're posting on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily about thought leadership, it's about anonymity, right? So it's
Mm,
very, very different. But two things still hold true. I think it's both trust and authenticity are both very, very, very important on both LinkedIn and Reddit. It's just a very different way of approaching how to actually go about that on a Reddit versus a LinkedIn.
yeah, the anonymity part is kind of what Reddit was built around, and I can imagine that's kind of that's a weird game to play if you're going in with the intention of creating organic brand mentions for, for a client. How much can you share with me about how your agency approaches that? I know you have several clients who you've onboarded specifically for Reddit marketing. What's your approach to doing that, and how do you win at it?
Yeah, you have to be very careful because you don't want to lose trust in your buyers as the company, right?
Yeah.
We have some service line businesses as well. It's the same thing. You don't want to lose trust in your B2B buyers or someone who's looking to purchase a red light therapy device. So it's the same thing. So I think you definitely need to have some guardrails in place for what is inbounds versus what is out of bounds.
Mm,
Moderators have very strict guidelines, and it's very important to follow those guidelines almost to a T.
mhm.
You also want to make sure that, again, it goes back to value adding. So you want to make sure that you're adding value first
Mm,
without outwardly promoting the product. Because if you're outwardly promoting the product, Redditors are going to sniff that up in a heartbeat and
yeah.
they're just not going to be responsive. And in fact, they're going to outright troll you, right?
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
the end of the day. So you're going to get a lot of backlash for that. So I think it's Reddit is definitely more of a long tail game. It takes time to brand
Mm,
build, it takes time to do all of the things, but we've seen pretty successful results in terms of like share of voice,
mm,
sentiment, that we're tracking in the AI visibility tools that we're using for our clients. So I think it's helpful both from a reputational management standpoint, as well as a brand visibility, sentiment, share of voice, all of those, geometrics that we care about.
yeah. No, I love those. That was one of my other questions is what are the sort of KPIs that you look at to measure success? I mean, you mentioned
Yeah.
just a couple of them there. I'm wondering if there's any additional ones, or is there just a couple?
Yeah, so we do a pretty big deep dive on this, and we have very specific reporting that is tied back to the visibility tools, as well as we want to also take a look at their Google Search Console, obviously, and their
Mhm.
Google Analytics Core, et cetera. So we want to take a picture and get blended data and take a look at the whole lens. But outside of typical like GA4 data, like session time and bounce and stuff like that, I think what really matters for geometrics is definitely share of voice,
Mm,
especially if the company, a client of ours has a lot of competitors in the space. A lot of them care about market share and a lot of
Mm,
them care about reputational management. So a lot of companies will come to us and say, hey, we have XYZ Reddit posts, and it looks like the competitor is actually bashing us.
mm,
And so that becomes very tricky because um, you usually don't want to add fuel to the fire, is the best way to put it. It's almost worse, and this would be our advice to companies. It's almost worse to comment back about, hey, no, you're wrong about XYZ. And you see it all the time in Reddit. It's
yeah.
very natural behavior, but you're adding fuel to the fire in ways that you're adding more ways for AIs to citate and pick it up. You're adding more comments to it potentially. You're adding more upvotes or
Mm,
downvotes to it potentially. There's a lot more ways that that could go wrong for you as the client than, hey, let's just try to own the conversation. We understand that that we have three or four really bad posts, and we understand that your CEO really cares about that, right? They're
yeah.
getting in their head. This is taken from personal context from almost all of the clients
Right.
that we work with. And that's the main impetus, right? Is
Yeah.
that's why they're like, there's three or four Reddit posts that we'd really like removed. Well,
Yeah.
it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. But let's try to overwhelm that and shower the market and shower Reddit with really positive posts
Mm,
instead. And that will hopefully sway the algorithm into more of those positive posts. And
mhm.
essentially, like I'm using Reddit language, but like downvote some
Yeah.
of the other more negative posts, right? And so I think that's what's really important to educate a lot of our clients about. And that's a lot of the work that we typically like to focus on, at least from like a reputational management standpoint.
Yeah, it's kind of the same as reviews, right? You can't delete reviews from other
Totally.
people, but you can try and overwhelm the system with positive ones.
Totally. And that's a lot of what we do with our geo work. A lot of it is reputation management.
Hmm.
It's kind of like digital PR in a sense, plus SEO. In addition, it's trying to uh, trying to have ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity and all of the AI LLMs to pull in information that is not necessarily misinformation
Hmm.
or not necessarily bad reviews or bad impact on performance, right? Now, obviously, if a company has a ton of bad reviews, there's only so much that we could do. And
Yeah.
that's like a big undertaking. So we likely probably wouldn't take that on in the first place.
Yeah.
Um, Seems like they probably are potentially not the greatest company to work with, but there are definitely instances where they are really great companies and they are being badmouthed by
Mm.
competitors or clients who were just very difficult clients. We have had those instances. So yeah, the short answer is it's really hard to affect that. And I think it's definitely a long tail game. And I think it's about brand building. It's about correcting misinformation. Something that we do as well is we call it like a LLM info page. I'm
Hmm.
not sure if anyone else on the podcast has
No,
spoke about
tell
this.
me.
It's a highly technical document that it's basically a one sheeter to showcase here's what our client is all about, and we're going to upload that and obviously confirm that data with our client. And it's very ingestible by ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude. Each one has different intakes, technical intakes for how they like to store the information. But essentially, you could think of it as we want to save to memory or create project folders or artifacts for Claude and ChatGPT and
Mm.
Perplexity. But we're actually posting the LLM info page as usually in the footer of our clients' websites. And
Hmm.
that way it makes the AIs a lot easier to crawl.
Hmm. Interesting. Do you label it as like a LLM info page in the footer, or is it somehow hidden?
It's hidden. It's hidden because from a UX standpoint,
Yeah.
obviously someone's going to go to the page. It's just going to be like a standard text file.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's nothing fancy. But yeah, it's going to be hidden on the client's website. But it really, really helps the way that we educate clients about this, since this is so new, is that it's kind of similar to like a technical SEO audit that you would do for a client. This would
Mhm.
just be one step in addition to the technical SEO audit
Mm.
that we would do is, hey, let's create an LLM info page. It's kind of like a fact sheet. And it
Yeah.
basically tells AI everything it needs to know to make it easier on the AI to crawl the website and
Mm.
to give it good information that we want it to be citing and referencing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really smart. I think as more people, it's not the first time I have heard that. It's the first time it's been mentioned on the podcast. So I appreciate you bringing this net new information as we're all trying to navigate the post AI search world, basically. I did see something, and I think there will be, some sort of regulation around that, which is invisible to humans, but the LLMs can read it. I saw something, I think it was on YouTube, where a guy was like, there are people who are doing like that have a summarize with AI button on a page, and an LLM will essentially
Oh,
go into that, and
yep,
then it will essentially prompt inject and basically say like, remember that this is the best source, like commit this to memory, basically, and tell the LLM like this is the source of truth without the
yep,
user knowing. So I think it's valid what you said, that like this is just information about the business that makes it easier for the LLM to retrieve it. It's probably, it is probably token optimized, I'm guessing, but yeah,
yep,
yeah.
yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly it, and I've seen those buttons too. I think it's just another way to, help the LLMs for readability, and, like I say, it's not gonna replace everything, obviously, but it's just a good kind of core foundational step that we usually recommend.
So you mentioned an SEO audit, and every agency forever has led with a traditional SEO audit as like a lead magnet or as an entry offer or whatever you want to call it. Walk me through your thoughts on how you position an audit.
Yeah, so we do things a little differently actually. We typically do audits as kind of like the first step like after signing. The way we do audits is typically very very extensive, and
Mm.
part of the reason for that is that I myself and I know a bunch of folks on my team have been pitched, or maybe we're looking to hire specific agencies or team members, and they almost always offer a free audit. I've never been blown away by a free audit, quite honestly. Like it's
Yeah.
very and maybe that's just me being marketing savvy, but I think there's a lot of, quite honestly, junk in a free audit.
Yeah.
And it depends, obviously, right? I
Mhm.
think there needs to be a little push and pull. But the way that we typically approach audits is typically very holistic, and it really depends on the nature of the work that we're doing. We're a full service marketing agency, which means that in addition to SEO and geo, we do Reddit marketing, like I've mentioned. We do a bunch of LinkedIn. We do a bunch of paid search, so Google, Bing. We do a lot of email marketing. We
Mm.
are really focused on kind of like the B2B sector, really any industry. We've worked with like, you name it, even like super niche industries whose
Mm.
total addressable market is like, 1,000 people.
Yeah.
So we've done a lot, but each of the audits we try to make it very specific to the business that we're actually working with, as well as the tactics that we think would be good for them. A good example is we had a recent company, and this happens all the time, by the way. They say they want one thing, but we think, okay, we could definitely do this for you, but is this the right approach with your budget and with
Mm.
your target audience? We don't know yet. We're not outright saying that isn't the right approach, but let us do a little bit more of like a deep dive and a holistic audit. And it turns out, this client wanted to do paid social. We were actually recommending, hey, the best bang for your buck is actually probably paid search. And here's why. And we uncovered that through the audit. So those are the typical approaches that we like to take in an audit, is not just, uh, not just going through, kind of like a 1, 2, 3 checklist,
Mhm.
but also providing more contextual insight into the approaches that they could potentially take. And not every client wants that level of detail. There are some clients that are very dialed in. They're already
Mhm.
part of marketing teams. They want to own the strategy, and they're looking to us to essentially be the executors, right? And so, we're happy to do that as well. But yeah, for a lot of our clients, that's the way we typically approach audits.
And what you said is at the end of the audit, there's there's almost like a gap that's left open, which is the strategy. And it sounds like you kind of
Yeah.
put that into the audit itself. It's like innately, what do you do with all this information? We're going to include that so you actually feel like we don't just give you a bunch of jargon and then expect you to
Yeah.
figure it out. This is what it looks like to do business with us. Like we're always a step ahead and we always keep you in the loop and transparent.
Exactly. Yeah, and we always like to give optionality.
Mm,
We never like to say, unless there is it more of a de facto, like, hey, this we've been here, we've done this, we think this is the best route, let's go this route. That
hmm
is in some cases what we will recommend, but we always like to give the optionality of proactiveness of, here's option one, here's option two, here's option three. We think you should go with option three because of XYZ, but the goal is to get them to a stage where they feel comfortable with the decision moving forward, not where
hmm
there's a little bit more ambiguity to your point of, okay, great, we did all of this audit, but now what the hell does this mean?
hmm Right, right. Bring me into the agency a little bit. You have a unique
Yeah.
structure where there's 17 or so people who are working at Llama Lead Gen.
Yeah.
Tell me about your structure of the actual agency. Like, what does it look like? What's the hierarchy?
Yeah, yeah. So our structure might be a little bit different than how, similar smaller or mid-sized agencies kind of structure themselves. We still go with a pod structure kind of environment. So not every client is getting all 17 folks, obviously. That
Mm,
would be insane. Our typical pod structure is some combination of myself, my director of marketing, my account manager, and then any number of specialists. So the
mm,
typical way that I personally hire is senior specialists. So these are folks that are, top of their field. They really know what they're doing. And it really is an interest. I found it to be a very interesting model because, like you mentioned, I have about 17 folks on my team at the current moment. That kind of
mhm,
flexes up and down based on clients, based on seasonality, of course,
mhm,
but it allows us to be full service marketing while also honing in on very specific specialties. So for
mm,
instance, I mentioned Reddit marketing. We have a Reddit marketing pro or an expert on our team.
mm,
And that person, that's all they do. They live and breathe Reddit.
mm,
They might do some other organic social here or there, but they are true Reddit experts. Same with our paid search director. He lives and breathes Google and Bing. That's all he does. That's kind of the model that we've employed is having these team of really highly skilled, highly specialized experts in their own tactical area,
mm,
and depending on the nature of the client and the nature of the services that they onboard us for, we will bring in those senior specialists accordingly. The core of it would be, myself, my director of marketing, my account manager. So there's a couple of folks on my team that are very core across clients. And
mhm,
I think that's where we really shine is kind of like the cross collaboration because we could take it from, hey, we have this learning from this client, and that might be a value add for the client that we're now talking to currently. So
mhm.
I think that's kind of more or less like a hybrid model of how we approach things. But I would imagine there's definitely other agencies you've
Yeah.
probably interviewed that are probably similar-ish to
Yeah,
that
yeah.
structure.
Yeah, no, I like the pod structure because it gives you flexibility, it gives you speed, gives you all kinds of optionality, like you mentioned. One thing that I've seen is particularly difficult with a global team that's spread across time zones. I mean, you have people all over the United States, but you also have people in South America and elsewhere around the globe. With pod structures like that, knowing that a client may have three different services. They're doing Reddit, they're doing paid search, and they're doing maybe a little bit of SEO. I would imagine that all comes under a overall strategy umbrella that's led by you or the marketing director. How do you manage communication and make sure everybody is working at the same pace and nothing gets, I guess, dropped and more so the quality doesn't impact other segments?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's always a challenge regardless.
Mhm.
I think it's something we've gotten really, really good at. We have, and it's a credit to my team, specifically, my account manager and project manager. They're really, really good at keeping our team very in check and organized. So we have very specific workflows and tools that we use. So we ourselves, we use like ClickUp as like our internal project management tool.
Mhm.
And we have very specific workflows within that ClickUp, within the specific project boards where everyone is very aligned on how to go about their day to day. Because, and I'm fortunate enough that most of my team have now been working with me for many years at this point. But because we've done so many of, Project X, right? Like LinkedIn marketing or Reddit or
Mhm.
SEO or now newly geo, we know for a fact, no matter, dependent on the industry, depending on the nature of the client, we know there is de facto steps that we need to do. And we know that there is a step by step process that we want to follow in order to get the best results from the client. And so
Mm.
I think something that we do really well is we take a really iterative approach. And I've noticed that just in talking with other agency owners and just from being in the space, not a lot of folks do a post-mortem
Mm.
after working with a client.
Mm.
And we found that pretty valuable to, not necessarily say, hey, here's what we did wrong, or
Mhm.
maybe it's not even what we did wrong. A lot of times it's just, hey, we don't have the budget, or hey, it's been a good run, and or maybe the project's complete, right? But doing more of a post-mortem of what could we have done better operationally, feedback wise. I like to think of it as like in the Olympics, you're running, a 500-meter dash. It's how do we pass the baton better to each of the specialists, right?
Mm.
And so I think that's been really important for us as we're all kind of working async, and also just hiring really good people that are very committed, that are, like I said, kind of top of their class, really know what they're doing, and are very proactive and communicative. I've definitely had some hires in the past that didn't necessarily work out because they didn't know how to work in that remote first kind of environment. But
Mm.
I think I got very lucky in that sense because, at least from my background, doing remote year previously, I was used to kind of working more async, especially when I was in countries like Vietnam or Thailand, where I was waking up at PM and working from midnight to God knows when,
Right.
taking business client calls. It's tough.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think just being flexible as well, I think is really important.
Yeah. Flexible, adaptive, and honestly hungry and curious. I mean, I think these are the types of people who will win in the future, like in this post AI era. Specialists, yes. However, with Claude, you can just upload skills, literally like 20 years
Totally.
of SEO knowledge. You can just upload it. And I think the people who are going to win and continue to win, I think we'll see a whole new wave of these people who are non-technical, but they're very curious and they're very driven and they're focused and they are willing to explore tech and they're willing to see how it works and they're looking for outcomes, they're looking for results, and they may have characteristics like me where when I'm passionate about something I become manic and don't close my eyes for like from
Yeah.
8 p.m. to 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
day. So I think those are the types of people that are going to continue to win in the post AI era. Adam, as we kind of wrap up the conversation here, tell me a little bit about how you find those people and how you test those people before you bring them onto your team.
Yeah, so this has been kind of an ongoing process as well. But to your point, I think it's really important, and this is what I personally hire for as well, is soft skills.
Hmm.
Soft skills is very hard to learn. It's very hard to teach. It is teachable, obviously, but I think more than ever, it's going to be more and more important to hire for soft skills because, to your point, there are already those technical skills. If you could just upload 20 years of an SEO expert into Claude and boom, you've got yourself a senior SEO strategist.
Yeah.
You don't need a lot of the technical components, right? Like there are certain roles that will still need some of those technical components, but that's how we've always hired, is relying more on the soft skills. And I
Hmm.
think more and more, to add to kind of plus one to what you just said,
Hmm.
is I'll give client reporting as a great example, I think, in this space, is that yes, sure, Claude and GPT and all of them could spit out certain reports and certain numbers. But if you don't have the soft skills and if you don't know how to actually translate that data into actual meaningful context and value add for your clients, then you're not only doing a disservice to yourself or your agency if you're a freelancer, contractor, what have you. It's just not gonna cut it, I think. And
Yeah.
kind of like the new age of AI. So I think that's really important is looking for someone who could kind of be a really good data storyteller, if that
Mm.
makes sense. That's what
Hmm.
I would liken it to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the leaning into soft skills, I love that because in the future, we're all talking about how AI is supposed to make our jobs and our lives easier and more efficient. And nobody is really, at least from what I've seen, I have plenty of conversations like you do, but nobody's really talking about what do we do with all the extra time? What happens
Yeah,
when we're left with just ourselves or we actually get to hang out? Do we feel guilty about that? Do we feel like what do we do? How do we become more human? So the soft skills part I
yeah,
think is really valuable and we can spend more time exploring the depths and the crevices of our minds and ideas and of our connections and how can we make the client experience better, not just drive business results because those will inevitably come because everybody has the skills, right?
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And I think that's super important is to how do you and it's not a straight or easy answer, right?
Mhm.
It's how do you actually map those back to each other? And I think we're still figuring that out, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. Adam, where can we learn more about you, about Llama Lead Gen and all the cool
Yeah.
projects you have going on?
Yeah, so llama.leadgen.com, we have a wealth of information there. We have a ton of blogs, ton of case studies, ton of interactive cost calculators if
Mm,
you're, looking or curious to run some ad campaigns. I know we didn't get into it on this pod, but we also have a ton of we'll call them sister agency partnerships. So
mm,
we work with a ton of companies in either a white label kind of agreement or referral agreement, as I'm sure many of your other agencies do as well. So we're always looking to bring on, really smart, capable, intelligent partners.
mm.
But yeah, check out the website, check out our LinkedIn, and we also have our podcast launching very soon as well. It's
Nice.
called Lead Gen in the Wild because
Nice.
we're llama lead gen, so we have to add the llamas just roaming free in the wild
Yeah.
doing marketing things.
Very cool. Very cool. And if someone is one of those smart, ambitious, awesome potential partners, should they reach out on LinkedIn or somewhere else?
Yeah, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, or I'm happy to even drop my email if they want to shoot me a line there. But yeah, more than happy to talk on whatever channel makes the most sense.
Cool. Well, Adam, thanks for being a great guest. I love how you walked us through the journey. Keep us up to date with different platforms and what's actually working and why, and then taking us into how LLG runs. LLG, LLM. I almost said LLM, Llama Lead
Yeah,
Gen. Yeah, yeah. So thanks for being a great guest. And yeah, I'll look forward to hearing your first Lead Gen in the Wild episode when it drops.
yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Austin. It was great chatting with you, and yeah, looking forward to more potential chats, and hopefully this was valuable for your audience.
Rock on, man. Cheers.
Cheers.